Roxana is a Shipley graduate of order in the class of 1964. Her mother, Allie Scoville Barry, also studied here, class of 1929. She lived to be 101 years old. Her cousin Betsy Scoville Smith, and I remember her, was a member of the class of 53, and Betsy's daughter, Lisa Smith Donovan, was the class of 1976. Here, Roxana learned the art of writing and never stopped. More importantly, she was my student in my chemistry class. She gave the graduation address in 1998. She lives in Connecticut with her husband, Tony, her daughter, and two stepchildren. She also spends time in Manhattan. She is the author of 11 books, 7 novels, 3 collections of short stories, and a biography of Georgia O'Keeffe. 4 of these were selected as New York Times notable books, 2 as New York Times editor choices. Her books have been published in countries throughout the world, and her fiction has appeared in many literary magazines. Roxana also is a scholar of American paintings, and she's an environmentalist. Now, maybe she did learn a little bit from the chemistry. Her essays and op-eds can be found in many newspapers, including the New York Times and the Philadelphia Inquirer. Her novel Cost was recognized as one of the best books of the year by many newspapers, including the Wall Street Journal and Washington Post. Likewise, her novel Sparta won the Main Fiction Award and was named one of the best books of the year by the BBC. Let's see what awards are bestowed on her most recent book, Leaving, which is the subject of our meeting today. Roxana has received fellowships from organizations such as the Guggenheim Foundation, and she was named a Literary Lion by the New York Public Library. She has served on the boards of several literary organizations and was president of the Authors Guild in 2013 through 2017. In 2019, she received the Barnes & Noble Writers for Writers Award. She is presently teaching in the MFA program at Hunter College in New York. You can find a more detailed biography on her website, Roxana Robinson Biography, and also in Wikipedia. Also, check out interviews with her on YouTube. We're very excited to have her here today with us. We congratulate her on being honored this morning with the Distinguished Alumni Award, which she richly deserves. She is a very special and accomplished lady. Welcome, Roxana.
Thank you very much, Ms. Colin. I remember those chemistry days. I was not paying attention, but you did your best. Thank you. It's wonderful to be back at Shipley. There's so many rich memories that I've just been sharing with my classmates. And I got a wonderful education here, and it was, for me, a great introduction to the world of literature with wonderful teachers. One teacher in sophomore year, whose name I can't remember, but also Miss Riley and Mrs. Epps, who were just great, great champions of the world of literature. So today I'm going to start off this discussion of this book, which also was just recently named a New York Times Editor's Choice. I'm very happy to say. All right, I'm going to start off on the first page just to give you a sense of the way the book begins. I never thought I'd see you here, Sarah says. Then she adds, but I never thought I'd see you anywhere. They're at the Opera House on the 2nd floor near the head of the grand staircase. He's facing her, leaning his hips against the railing, hands set lightly on either side. Beyond him, in the high open space of the atrium, hang the glittering crystal chandeliers, frozen starbursts. Below, people move up and down the broad, red-carpeted staircase, hurrying but stately. They are mostly over 50. This is the second intermission, and there is only so much time left to meet someone, eat something, drink something, void, before the caped ushers begin playing their little xylophones, the bright, tuneless melodies announcing the last act. She had known him at once. His younger face is still visible within this older one, though this one is creased now, hollowed here, fuller there. The same square shape, same bright brown eyes and wide brow. The same thick, light brown hair, though now not so thick. The same fierce vitality in the gaze. I always thought I'd see you somewhere, he says. He looks directly into her eyes. He'd always done this, looked straight into her, as though she were important. It had always unnerved her. You look just the same. She smiles, but shakes her head. You know what I mean, he says. You do. Your eyes. They had been close at one time. After the last curtain call, the dark-haired soprano curtsying deeply and charmingly, kissing her fingertips to the audience as plastic-wrapped bouquets thud onto the stage, before the swirling gold curtain is finally drawn for good. Sarah stands, putting on her jacket. She buttons it as she inches her way across the row of seats to join the slow scrum in the aisle. She glances around for Warren, though he told her he was on the other side of the house. Almost as soon as they'd met, the little xylophones had begun their atonal melodies, and they'd had to part. He'd asked her to come out for a drink afterward, but she'd said no. She'd said it would be too late. Actually, it had been too sudden. She couldn't decide in that moment if she wanted to sit across from him again, letting him look into her. He asked for her email address, but he hadn't written it down. She thinks he'll forget it. It's so easy to forget those addresses, which seem in the moment so obvious, so unforgettable. Clara38 at whatever. But they're also obvious in all their other iterations too. Was it Clara39 at somewhere else, or Clara B38? Hers is simple and obvious. She thinks he'll forget it. Now I'm skipping a moment or a page or two. He had not forgotten her address. His first message is short. I was glad to see you. She doesn't answer at once. It's the tone that concerns her. He's married. She knows that. What does she want? But she was glad to see him. She's allowed to be a friend. Finally, she writes back, yes, me too. He writes again. He's coming to New York on business next month. Will she meet him for dinner? She thinks about it. The speed of email telescopes time, so that thinking about it for a few hours seems like days. Coming into dinner, the city for dinner, is complicated for her. She lives in northern Westchester, over an hour away. It really means spending the night. She doesn't like driving home late, alone, her head fumed with wine. But she has a friend with a spare bedroom. She writes back, yes. They meet at the restaurant, a fancy one on the west side. Along the street are big plate glass windows. As Sarah walks along the sidewalk, her little suitcase trundling behind her, she sees him inside. He's at a table in the middle of the room, very upright. His elbows are set elegantly on the table, hands clasped. He's watching the door. As she comes in, he smiles at her, spreading open both hands in celebration. The restaurant is modern and expensive. The latter is evident from the heightened awareness of everyone in the room, the slightly hostile deference of the head waiter, the attentive, slightly condescending waiters, the sharp, sidelong glances of the other diners, the glitter of earrings and bracelets. Along the inner wall, more plate glass windows give onto the kitchen, where chefs in white coats move swiftly, chopping and stirring and slicing. Among white tile and stainless steel, pots and knives, steam and flame. The kitchen is like a silent movie, the workers framed, frenetic, soundless. Warren stands to meet her, smiling. "Thank you," she says, sliding onto the banquette. When he sits down, their faces are close, and he looks directly into her eyes. Unsettled, she speaks to break the silence. "I don't think men stand up for women anymore," she says. "Do they? When we were kids, my father would say to my brother, 'Stand up when your mother comes into the room.' Do you remember? No one does that now. The culture of our youth," he says, "gone. Good riddance, most of it," she says, "all those rules." "It's good to see you," he says. 30 years, anyway. Nearly 40. That's the beginning.
Thank you, Roxana. It's wonderful to hear these beautiful words in your beautiful voice, and we thank you so much for being here. I'm going to start off giving a few themes from the book, and then we're going to go right into questions and let you lead the way with that.
Can I just say beforehand, has anyone not read the book? Okay, so we're not going to talk about the ending.
We're not going to talk about the end, although there's lots to talk about. Come back later. So I think some of the themes involve what does love demand of us and who must pay the price. Also, romance is different in the second half of life. For other than the obvious physical reasons, we have other responsibilities, we have differing family dynamics. We're more aware of the notions of obligation, honor, which you discussed this morning briefly, and the idea of being the other woman or the other man. The role of parents of adult children. Quoting Sarah and Warren, Sarah says, "When we knew each other before, we were just ourselves. Even when I got married, I put off having kids." And Warren answers, "And now they're central. I can't imagine things without them." And Sarah comes back with, "The way they add to you as a person, how you become yourself plus the child. You can never become a single person again." And Warren ends that conversation with, "There is no divorce from them." There's also several allusions to the Bloomsbury Group from 1907 to 1930, which included writers, philosophers, and artists, as well as people from the LGBTQ community. Virginia Woolf comes into play a little bit. There's a quote from To the Lighthouse. I couldn't help but thinking about Mrs. Dalloway, which became The Hours, which became an opera. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. And the opera that opens the book is Tosca, which ends in a quiet suicide. And later, at sort of midway in the book, they're discussing opera, and they note tragedy ends in a death, comedy in a marriage. So which will it be? So to start us off, Roxana, what inspired you to start this story? I know you have some great tales.
So lots of things go into the beginning of a book, and I'll tell you more about how I came to this idea, but the reason that it opens at the opera with Tosca, I cannot tell you. I don't know. I wasn't thinking, oh, this contains everything that I want the book to be. It was really that I had been to this particular performance, and it was incredibly powerful to me, and that just came as the way that I entered this book. And as I have said before in some interviews, that when I write a book, the first sentence never changes. I may change other things in the text. I don't move things around because for me it's a sort of an organic chronological narrative, but the first sentence and usually the first paragraph stay. So this was going to be at the opera with Tosca, and then the rest sort of came from that. But the way I came to this idea of romance in the second part of your life was that, as I said this morning, writers write about the things that they see in the world around them and the things that they experience themselves. And I started becoming aware of the fact that there was stuff going on in the late second half of people's lives that I hadn't been aware of. And I was at a fundraiser in Maine, and it was one of those things where you pay to go to a dinner, but it's at somebody else's house. And so I was at this big dinner, a buffet at somebody's house that I didn't know, and I ended up sitting next to a man who was much older than I was, and I'm a writer, so I was grilling him, saying, how long have you been in Maine? Why did you come? What do your kids do? And, who's your wife? And it became clear that the woman he lived with in this house was not his wife. And I said, wait, and he was like in his 70s, and I was like in my 40s, and I said, so wait, you two, you're not? And he said, we live in sin. We're living in sin. And they're these, nice gray-haired people with a big house in Mount Desert Island. And I thought that's so interesting, because that's a phrase that really sort of came into common usage in the 60s when people were trying to shock the bourgeoisie. It was living in sin. And this guy is the bourgeoisie. So something is happening here that I wasn't aware of. And he said, well, our finances are all settled. Our kids would be upset if we changed everything. So, and there's no reason for us to get married. And I thought he's right. There's no sort of church presence that's imposing it on him. It's no longer against the law to have sexual relations outside of marriage. So why not? But it was a big cultural change. And then the other thing, the little anecdote that hit me was I was at a family engagement party in Boston at a club, and so it was my husband's family. I didn't know most of the people there. And again, I ended up talking to a woman who was probably in her 70s, and I was probably in my 50s. And she had white permed curls and a little pearl necklace and black dress. And she looked very proper, and she was very nice. And she said to me, I was standing right here in this same room, and I looked across the room and I saw Peter for the first time, and I thought, I am going to marry him. And I said, that's so great. And did you? And she said, and I did. And I said, that's such a wonderful story. And how long ago was that? She said, 3 years ago. And I thought, okay, I did not know this was going on. There's stuff going on that I hadn't thought about. And the more I started looking around me, I could see couples who were dealing with these issues, and after the age of, say, 60, your life is completely different as a single person. You have, by that time, established a life. You've had a job, a career of some sort. You have colleagues. You have a place that you've been living in for a long time. It has a lot of associations for you. And you may have adult children, and you have a very connected relationship to them. So it puts you in a very different position from the person you were in your 20s, when you have no obligations and it doesn't matter what your plans are. The two of you can move to China for 5 years, and no one is put out by it. But after 60, there's a lot in your life that is settled and fixed, and it's hard. And I know of, say, 4 couples who live separately. I mean, I know one couple who lived 5 blocks apart in New York, 2 couples actually. Neither one of them would give up their apartment. They've been there for years. I don't know what their sleeping arrangements were, but neither one would give them up. I know one couple, he lives in Princeton in a family house. She lives outside Boston, where she's lived for years. I don't know how they work it out, but there are people who just are fixed in one place and they're not giving it up. So it just began to interest me that there were so many complications that were part of your life after a certain age, and it made romance much more interesting to me to write about. So that's the long answer to that question.
That's fantastic. I was fortunate enough to hear the story of Peter and of the living in sin couple by watching the YouTube interviews, and I just wanted you all to enjoy it as much as I did. Sarah and Warren's connection is so immediate and so passionate. You, as their best friend, might be best be able to answer, is it because of their shared history, unfinished business, inevitable destiny, something else?
Well, I think that especially after you get to a certain age, you start remembering. Memory becomes a big part of your life. And I once decided that the definition of old age would be at the point in which you looked backwards more than forwards, that it gave you more pleasure to look backwards than to look forward. And I haven't reached that yet, but I think that looking backwards becomes really interesting, and coming here this weekend, thinking of all the times we had at Shipley, reminds me of all that. And it's very powerful to have had a relationship when you're young and then to meet that person later, because you already have physical knowledge of that person. That's all part of who you are. It's very different from meeting somebody who's a newcomer when you're over 50. But to meet somebody that you had a powerful connection to gives you an immediate shortcut to a further relationship. And if any of you are on Facebook, there are all these ads saying, do you want to find out where your high school friends are? So clearly there's a current here of sort of, oh yeah, I'd like to know what happened to so-and-so. There's this urge to reconnect with your earlier self. So that gives them an immediate connection and also a sort of a moral pass, because they're not doing anything new that's against the law. They've already done it. It's in the past. So they're just really repeating the same sentence over. So I think that's what's going on.
I remember Sarah. Yes, this is on. I remember Sarah saying that obviously he had had a lot of experiences since she last knew him, and she was sorry that she hadn't been a part of those. I thought that was very, very interesting.
Well, it's really I think what you're talking about is a reference to a moment in To the Lighthouse, which I love. And Mrs. Ramsey is hearing somebody talk about a mutual friend whom she knew years ago and hasn't seen in years, and she says, oh, I remember them. I remember seeing them on the river. It was so cold. We were all there. And the mutual friend says, well, they built a conservatory. And she says, they built a conservatory? The friends that I had, they would never build a conservatory. I mean, what a pretentious thing to do. I owned my knowledge of them. How could they do something that was so unlike what I know about them? And I thought that was such a great moment, because we all sort of think we own our memories of people, and then when they break that creation that we've made, we feel they've somehow done something outrageous to us. So Sarah thinks she knew Warren, she owned her knowledge of him, but he's done things that she's never even heard about. So you feel that slight sense of outrage. It happens when you feel a privilege that attaches to your knowledge of somebody. You own that person, a close friend, or that old lover, and then they do something outside of that privileged part of your experience. So it feels like a violation.
That's very true. At one point, you mentioned in one of the interviews that your characters frequently inform you about themselves. And this jumped into my mind. I'm going to tell a dirty little secret on myself. Sometimes I watch Hallmark movies. So I saw a Hallmark movie where an author is forced to keep writing pop romance, and when he really wants to grow and switch genres, his editors force him back into the sure-selling thing. And his characters, who are being portrayed in this movie, object, and they lecture the author, and they encourage him to move forward into the uncharted territory. Can you tell us in what way your characters instruct you or have instructed you in the past?
Well, we don't have such a confrontational relationship, my characters and me, but I have learned not to try to plan what they're going to do. In my first novel, Summer Light, I didn't start out writing a novel. I thought I was writing a short story. It's about a couple who go out in a boat in Maine, a group of friends who go out in a boat for dinner in Maine. And I thought it was a short story, but at the end of it, really not much had happened. I was just setting the scene, and I realized, to my terror, that I had written the first chapter of a novel, and that I had embarked on something I hadn't planned to do. So I started writing, and I told my husband that, and he said, "Do you have an outline?" And I said, "No, do you think I should?" And my husband is a lawyer, and he said, "Well, if I were writing a novel, I would have an outline." And I thought, he's right. If I were writing a novel, I should have an outline. So I wrote an outline. Chapter 1, this is what happens. Chapter 2, he says this, she says that. So I started writing the book like that, but nobody would do what they were supposed to do in those chapters. They had other plans. And so when I write dialogue, for example, one of the great pleasures of being a novelist is you get to inhabit other people's consciousness and to understand what it feels like to be on both sides of an argument. And it's really fun. So I get very heated in these arguments. Well, you told me. Well, that's because you said. Well, I only said that because, and you know perfectly well, that's what you say now, but what about last week? So I get to take both sides of this. And when that happens, when there's an argument going on, I'm not in control of it. It's the characters whom I have come to know. I don't say I create them, so that's not really how it feels, but whom I've come to know very well in this book are their own people. So it doesn't feel as though they're instructing me, it just feels as if they are narrating this story.
Do you admire one of the characters, Sarah or Warren versus the other?
No, I really am fond of all my characters. I feel very compassionate for them. I mean, as I say, it's a pleasure and a challenge to inhabit characters, even the ones who are the most difficult. I admire Janet. I admire Kat. They're both desperate, and they're both struggling to make lives that satisfy them, as Sarah and Warren are. So it's a really challenging quadrangle that's created, but I feel great sympathy for all of them.
Absolutely. Thank you. I note that Sarah's relationship with her children is growing and improving throughout the book, and it's obviously very different from the stilted relationship and society she had with her own parents. Warren is close to and highly influenced by his daughter, Kat. In this generation, I think we enjoy a closer rapport with our children and are on a more equal grounds, as demonstrated in Leaving. Can you comment on what you learned in exploring this dynamic, the good and the bad?
Well, I mean, we've watched generations change, and I think we're seeing the way our society changes so quickly. It's just telescoping. You know, when Tolstoy wrote War and Peace, he wrote it in the 1870s or 60s, and it was about the War of 1812. So it's about 50 years earlier. It feels like a contemporary work to us. It seems like just as contemporary as Anna Karenina was. It feels as though but they're not. That was written about 50 years ago, about 2 generations earlier from him. But he hardly has to change anything because so little had changed in Russia. Everybody's still using horse and carriage. There are no cars, there are no planes, there's no industry. It's basically the same place. But for us, something that happened 50 years ago is another planet. I mean, there was no internet, there are no cell phones. There's so many things that are different now. And the way generations interact is incredibly different. And when our classmates were growing up, our relationships with our parents were, I mean, they were warm, but so the sense of distance I thought was normal to me, but it's not normal now. So I just think that the more you examine people's relationships, the more difference you find. And Sarah grew up on the main line. Did you ask me if she went to Shipley? Somebody asked me if she went to Shipley. You would think I would know, but I'm not sure that she did go to Shipley. I would know more about her if she'd gone to Shipley. She might have gone to Baldwin, maybe? No, that's too competitive. I would not have sent her to Baldwin. I don't know. But her background is one that I know because she's on the main line. But I do feel, for me, that my own relation to my parents and that of my classmates was more distant than my relationship now is to my children, and our relationship to our grandchildren is completely different from all of that. So I'm not saying any more than I just want to say it's all new.
Roxana, would you comment on the designs of the cover?
I had nothing to do with it, but it was one of 2 or 3 that my publisher presented, and I think it's very beautiful. I love the flower, and I love the difference in the shades of green. I love the fact that they're sort of mottled and gives you a sense of distance and complication.
Gorgeous. While we're on the topic of the cover, I did read that you had a working title, which was The Other Life, and your family,
No, the editor.
just the
didn't
editors.
like it.
No, I thought it was everybody
Well,
across the board.
It was my editor, my publicist, and my agent.
Okay.
And that's a gang that I
Your working family
Yeah.
all thought that you should change that title. Could you speak to that, and how do you felt about that? And what carried the day?
Well, the fact that they all ganged up on me, I wasn't going to stand up against all 3 of them. But I liked The Other Life because, for those of you who have read it, there is the sense of another possible sort of a parallel universe that Warren and Sarah could have occupied, and I liked that knowledge. And I think we all ask that question of ourselves: what would have happened if I had done it? If I'd gone to France junior year? If I'd married so and so instead of the person I did marry? So there is another life that we're all aware of. My editor thought it meant something spiritual. My agent, I don't know what, just thought it was weird. I thought it was really good, but I was overruled. I also didn't want to use it because, I think maybe it's a good title, but I also, Sparta caused Sweetwater leaving. It sounds as though I am a one-word title writer, and I wanted to break away from that and have 3 words, but I was back to 1.
Well, there's always next time.
I know.
Art and opera feature prominently in this book. Obviously, you wrote a definitive biography on Georgia O'Keeffe. So tell us what draws you to the opera art form, and do you have a favorite?
So I do have a lot of professional knowledge about art. I worked for Sotheby's in the 70s and fell in love with American art. I was a cataloger, which was an incredibly great position to be in because it meant that I picked up each painting that we sold. I examined the surface of it, I examined the brush strokes, I examined the subject and the composition, I looked at the back of it, the canvas, I looked at the way the artist had signed it. So I came to know art in a way that wouldn't have been possible if I had worked in a museum or just took a lot of art history courses. So that became, and I had always loved art. So that became a big part of my professional life, and I worked for an art gallery after that. And writers work in solitude. We don't do anything it's purely abstract. We're not making a table or writing a newspaper or something. It's all abstract and it's all solitary. So writers are always struggling to set their work in the real world. We have to find out. John Cheever once said that he was so envious of all the men he knew who went every morning off to offices. He said, what did they do? I had no idea. And it's always a struggle to find some way to have your characters connect with the world in ways that you don't know anything about. I know about art, and so it's embarrassing, actually. If you look at my work everybody in my books has some connection to art. One is a photographer, one is a painter herself, one is an art historian, this one is a curator. But it's a world that I know very well, and a world that nurtures me intellectually and whatever. So this woman is a curator, and art is really important. When I was writing this book, she works on an exhibition committee, and she's looking at two possible exhibitions, one of Netsky and one of English 19th century watercolorists. And so I did some research into those fields, and I was fascinated. And when a writer is researching something, what we do is tell you what we found fascinating. So I tell you what's fascinating to me about Netsky and about those British watercolorists. Opera is just the opposite for me. I have no professional connection to opera. It's my husband's love, and he started taking me to the opera years and years ago, and he is a real scholar and understands it in ways I will never understand. He's taken music courses, he's taken opera courses, and he has this great intellectual connection. I have no intellectual connection to it, and before there were surtitles, I never knew. Are we done? Okay, next class, everyone. Sorry. Before there were surtitles, I never knew what they were singing about. But opera is such a grand, extraordinary form of art, and it sort of does what writing does, but amplified by some otherworldly presence. The idea of, the fact of music enters into your emotional life in ways that we can't really describe. So it's a story told, amplified by music. So it's always fascinated me, and I have thought a lot about it, although I don't read about it, so I'm not really informed. But it always has struck me that opera reaches us in a way that no other art form does. And the great age of opera was the 19th century, which is a romantic century, a romantic period. We are in an age of irony, which doesn't really work with the romantic form. But in that age of romantic form, the idea of passion, the idea of honor are celebrated, and it is often in opera, it's the woman who is sacrificed to one of these demands, honor or passion. And that's the woman who is the vessel, and she is beautiful, and she is a sacrificial victim. So it's sort of thrilling with each opera that you watch to find yourself moving towards this point of tragedy that you can feel is coming, and the music tells you it's coming, and you watch it happen, and you watch this beautiful person with whom you identify. If you're a woman, if you're a man, you identify with her as a love object. So it just seems to me to be a fascinating presence in the world of art, and one that I feel very responsive to, but I also know I'm very uninformed and ignorant. I can't really talk about it to scholars, but I can present it as a part of one's emotional life.
Sarah and Warren are both in their 60s. Warren lives in Boston with his wife and family. Sarah lives, is it on Long Island, maybe, or Westchester?
No, Westchester.
On a beautiful place with her dog. My question is, which of the two is more aggressive in pursuing the relationship again?
Oh, Warren is definitely more aggressive. He's the pursuer.
Great. Well, we have talked a lot, and I bet some of you out there have questions. So would anyone like to raise their hand, and I'll bring you the microphone. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Hello. Just wondering what your writing process is on a daily basis.
I work first thing in the morning. I don't read email or newspapers or anything. I work on a computer. The way I write a novel is, as I say, chronologically start at the beginning with something that I find troubling to me, disturbing, something that I want to explore. The characters sort of evolve. Once I have the characters, I often write little mini biographies of them so that I know who they are, where they grew up, what their parents were like, what neighborhoods they grew up in. And that informs that character, and that allows that character to be consistent throughout the book. It's always going to be the same person coming from the same background, so that they're people you can rely on the book. They don't, it's not somebody who suddenly says something you can't imagine that character saying. I know the characters very well as I start out. And then the characters sort of investigate this subject that I want to explore.
How long did it take you to write the book?
Not long, because I didn't have to do any research. So I said this morning, the last Sweetwater deals with the environment. I did a lot of research about that. Cost, which I thought was going to take me 2 weeks to write, was about 3 generations in a summer house, 2 weeks in Maine in August. It was going to be very quiet and very interior, just these 6 people in the house. And it turned out that one of those 6 people is a heroin addict. And so it took me 5 years to write, going to NA meetings and talking to heroin addicts and family members and policemen and doctors. And the next one was about Sparta, was about Marines in Iraq, and that took me 5 years to write too. Dawson's Fall was about the Civil War and slavery, and that took 5 years. This one took about 15 minutes because I didn't have to do any research. It was a great relief.
Other question?
You talked about knowing the characters and that the characters tell you kind of what direction they want to go in sometimes. When you were talking about the editor and the title and sort of facing off with them, did they ever say, you know, I don't like that in the 4th chapter. I don't think that's going to sell, but she does whatever. And do you then feel you're in a difficult position that you have to bow to what will sell as opposed to what this character would really do?
I'm not what's called a commercial writer, so that's not what no one has ever said this won't sell to me. And I don't care about if an editor says, let's take out this chapter, as long as it doesn't damage the narrative, I don't care. There was something in this book that I put in, which my editor said was digressive. It was actually, there was a part in the book in which Sarah gets involved with a group of women writers who are mentoring girls in Afghanistan who are trying to write, and they send, it's an email thing, they send their pieces to mentors in America who write, and it's not really editing, it's saying this is a wonderful piece, good for you, but it's also, it's dangerous for the girls in Afghanistan. So it sort of raises the questions of what are good intentions, what are the unintended consequences, what should you do as a privileged white woman in America, how can you help a girl in Afghanistan? And it was interesting to me, and I had been involved with something like that myself, and I thought it sort of expanded Sarah's vision. And my editor said, this is a complete digression, it looks as though you're just trying to be politically correct, take it out. So I didn't care. It doesn't damage the narrative at all. I thought it was interesting if she didn't think so. And my editor's assistant is from the Middle East, and she said, I think it's great. So I didn't care. It didn't matter to me. If she had said change the ending, I would have said absolutely not. But this didn't matter to me. No, I've never had anybody say change something that I found was really important to keep.
I loved the book, and I thought you did a great job of developing the characters and describing their relationships and their conversations were so realistic, and I really hated to put it down because they were just that good. My question, and you sort of talked about having an outline for the first chapter, and then do your characters take over the story so that they figure out the ending, or did you? And I know we don't want to discuss the ending, but did you know how it was all going to be in the beginning, or did the characters move you in that direction?
So for all my other, well, except for Dawson's Ball, which is based on real characters, so I had nothing to do with the way that book was carried out. All the other books, really, the characters create the plot and the narrative. With this book, I did know the ending, so I was asking the characters to create a narrative that ended me there.
Interesting. Hi. I haven't read the book, but as you were reading the opening pages, and in my mind saying, "You've got to get out of there. You got to get out of there."
Get out of where?
Get out of that conversation. Get away from this man. And I'm not sure. I have no idea what happens in the book. But do you have an intention of how you want your reader to feel, or do you just present the story and the chips fall where they may?
Every word that you speak or set down carries more than one message. So yes, I have intentions with every word. You did not hear that opening the way I intended it, but as you read the book, you will learn more about my intentions. And I'm not questioning your response. Your response is your response. But what I want in that opening is to give you first of all, the physical sense of the Opera House in New York, and I never said the word New York, because for me, the Opera House is the Metropolitan in New York, and for me, it's such an important, powerful presence. I couldn't bear to identify it as though I had to say, this is in Kansas City. It is, for me, the Metropolitan Opera House. But I want, first of all, for you to have a sense of the grandeur and the splendor of that place, and the fact of people coming there to receive a very powerful and rich emotional message. We learn that Warren's wife doesn't like the opera, so he only comes when he goes alone in New York. Sarah loves the opera and goes alone. So those are the pieces of information that you know about this, plus the fact you know that they had a relationship years ago. But you'll find as you go through. Now, if you were paying attention during their conversation at dinner, you're hearing Warren, who is making Sarah feel special. You don't know yet what his intentions are, but you will learn more and more about that. I can understand how you might feel that he's dangerous, but the more you meet him and deal with him, you will see that his feelings for Sarah are very positive and very supportive. But what I want you to know in that opening is that the sort of splendor of the opera and the setting for a place of great passionate emotion.
So I was reacting to Noni's comment about not wanting to put the book down. I mean, I think I stayed up very late one night because I just had to get to the end. But I had given myself the luxury of being able to go back and start rereading it, mostly in preparation. I reread books a lot, but not usually right after I've finished. It's definitely worth a second read. You pick up things that in retrospect you hadn't quite understood the first time through. So that's just a sidebar. Any other question?
First one over here. One of the next.
Hi, I have another process question. You said that you write the first sentence or the first paragraph and you never go back. To me, that is just unimaginable. But, so my question
Is that Trina?
yes.
Hi.
Hi. So my question is, how long does it take you to write that first sentence and first paragraph? And how much gestation time is there before you get to that first sentence and paragraph?
Good question. I have no idea how long the gestation period is. I mean, I'm turning something over in my head that I want to write about, and I can't evaluate that period of time. It could be months or years, and that when I set the sentence down, I don't mean to make it sound as though this is a piece of jewelry. It just happens to be in this. I could tell you right now the first sentence of every novel I've written. And they're not brilliant, beautiful pieces of prose. It's just, for me, that's the portal. That's the way into this book, and I never want to go back and change it. The way I write each chapter, it's not that I never revise. It's like brushing somebody's hair and getting the tangles out. I start each chapter is a separate file in my computer, and each time I finish a chapter, and I have gone over every sentence over and over and over, and I may change a word or two or change a paragraph. I don't put chapter 2 into and make it chapter 38. That never happens. But I will rewrite chapter 2 over and over again before I move to chapter 3. And I sort of smooth out each sentence. Each sentence has to be perfect in my mind before I move to the next sentence. So I don't want to make it sound as though I never rewrite. I do. It's just that opening for me is the way into the book. I can't change that. That would mean writing another book.
See, thank you.
Other thoughts or questions?
Thank you. That leads me to wonder, do you set aside chapter 2 after you finished it and you go to chapter 3 and you never go back to 2 or 1? Or do you re-inform earlier chapters by what you like later? And what you learned later about the characters?
So, really good question. I don't go back once I've finished a chapter. That's sort of set in stone. So I can never go back and say, oh, he would have said something else. People create themselves and they inform themselves and each other and me as they move through the book. So I can't go back and say, oh, she would have said this then, because she was a different person then. You can't start mixing Susie from 1964 with Susie from 1978. So again, for me, it's a chronological, organic movement. So yeah, I might go back to chapter 1 when I'm in chapter 3, but by the time I'm in chapter 18, I never look at chapter 1 again. And I never look at my books again after they're published. Because it's another world, and it would give me the creeps. I might want to change something. That would be awful. So yeah, for me, it's moving through it sort of the way you do, but a little more slowly. So I can't go back and change things. I might change 1 or 2 things. I think, oh yeah, she might have said this because she says that later, but nothing substantive. I don't go back and stick in hints later or make her nicer then because I want her to be nicer later. She is who she is in chapter 2, and that's what informs her in chapter 34, but I don't go back and change it. That would be chaos.
Right. So it was so interesting to hear you share that for each of your books. It sounds like, I'm forgetting the word you used, but whether it's a moral dilemma or like a theme that you're ruminating on that maybe you've been ruminating on for years. Do you have your next theme? And would you be willing to share?
So I do have my next book. I never talk about books while I'm writing them And it's sort of like those bubble tennis courts that you play in the winter with the airlock. If I were to talk about it, the whole thing, all the air would drain out of it, and I would not be able to write it. And a lot of fiction writers feel that if you expend the energy talking about it, then you go back to your computer and you think, I don't need to write this story. I already told it. It's known. It's already out in the world. So you have used up that energy. So I don't talk about it at all, and I don't tell anyone. In fact, including my husband. And so I don't know if I said this morning, but I said it to somebody that while I was writing Cost, which was the most labor-intensive research that I had to do, I had not told my husband that every time he left the apartment, I would go onto my computer to find an AA meeting right then so that I could get out and back before he came home again. So it's like having an affair. I'm rushing off to Harlem to go to a narcotics meeting to deal with people who I've never heard of. And then my husband would come home and say, what did you do today? Nothing, just wrote, writing. So you really feel as if you're leading a double life, but I could not tell him any of those things because they had to be contained inside me so that the intensity of them could go onto the page. So my answer is I can't tell you. Sorry.
That was great. But we're just glad that there's a new one percolating.
I just want to say how much I enjoy your word choices. And that clearly the editing that you do, I mean, almost each word is a gem, which is what I think makes it so fun to read. And I can see wanting to go back and read again, because, how thoughtful, how clear, inspiring, just all kinds of richness goes into each word, and that's very wonderful.
Well, thank you. I forget who said this, but some writing teacher was, every writer who's called a literary writer writes at the sentence level. We want beautiful sentences. We want to read them. We want to make them. So when I teach, and this was not my sentence, somebody else said it, but challenge every word in a sentence. When I teach creative writing, I say short stories should be like a fish. The shape should be perfect. It should be aerodynamically marinely perfect, so that nothing is extraneous, nothing is left out. And the surface should be like a fish's surface, with every word fitting neatly into the word before it and the word behind it. And the surface should be completely smooth and gleaming, shining. So there's nowhere that snags you. So that when I write a sentence, I'm hearing them in my mind, and I encourage writers to read dialogue out loud. For example, you want to hear the words in your head. And if I'm writing a sentence, I don't want all the words to be polysyllabic. Some should be short. You shouldn't have too many polysyllabic words close to each other. You might want to change the order of the words to make the rhythm of the sentence perfect. So the intention is to have every word in a sentence perfect, clear, and also beautiful. That's the hope. Yeah.
There was a little short segment to end here by the principal here in this whole segment. It says, now Sarah has determined that she will listen to her daughter, to her grandchildren, to her son-in-law. The greatest failure in her life at this age, she confronts this kind of awful milestone, then her failure to listen. Her failure at the intimacy, a time when they'd been young, and she had not opened herself to Warren. She had not asked him to reveal himself, to beam into to step into the beam of her awareness. She had not asked him what he had meant or who he was. She had judged him and turned away. That failure was always with her. So I was wondering whether you could
just comment on listening and sobriety or that that principle stood out to me.
Well, I think that's one of the big questions that we confront as human beings. We're constantly faced with the need to act, to read the environment and respond to it. And that's important for survival. We have to do that. But on the other hand, and this is something Shipley encouraged us, we need to pay attention to others. That we can't just act on our own. We can't just make decisions and then carry out our wishes. That's only half of life, and it's in some ways it's dry. It's not nourishing if we only act on our own behalf. We have to have the other half. We have to listen. We have to ask people what they think, what they want, what their inner places are like. So for Sarah in this book, she makes a terrible mistake early on. We all do. We all make mistakes. But for her, that's brought in on her. It's borne in on her very powerfully. So in some ways, the book is a reflection of that, how to become aware of the fact that listening is a hugely important part of our lives if we want to stay close to people.
So you're wonderful. Thank you so much for being here today. Those of you who have not read the book, please do. We've kept the ending from you on purpose, but please do read it. Roxana, thank you very, very much. It occurs to me that you may not know this is Khaki Buck Rogers, class of 73, and I'm Laura Coleman Wampler, class of 56. Together we co-chair the Shipley Alumni Book Club. And